Today's story is so fierce, it feels like it was carved straight out of bone. Set in a west where the wind carries ash and old gunpowder across endless red mesas. It's a place where justice and revenge share the same saddle and fate waits in the dust with a loaded rifle. It began with a wounded horse limping home at sunset, a small, bleeding shadow on the horizon. But it was enough to awaken ghosts that had been buried for years. The desert out beyond the canyon had a habit of swallowing noise and keeping secrets buried in red grit and sage. As the sun sagged low and spilled fire across the mesas, the only thing moving on that wide horizon was a black gelding dragging one hind leg, a deep slice torn above his flank, headed slow toward the ranch tucked in the bend of Kindred Hollow. Arlen Wren saw him first. Her hands tightened around the splintered fence rail, eyes narrowing against the blaze of evening light. She slipped through the gate barefoot, skirts whispering over sand, and reached for the reins with the same low murmur she used on skittish colts. The horse jerked back, nostrils flared, eyes rolling white. But her voice, steady, river deep, calm as dusk, worked its way into him. The trembling eased. She laid her palm against his neck and breathed out soft. "What happened to you, Brack?" From the porch, Thorne Halvik watched without a word. Tall, spare as a fence post, leaning on a cedar cane polished by years of grip. He didn't shout, didn't question. He just stood there, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. Arlen led Brack toward the barn, a thin ribbon of blood marking their path in the dust. Inside, she struck a lantern and set to work, washing the wound clean, hands sure despite the shaking in her chest. Thorne stepped in only after she finished binding it tight. "That ain't no coyote bite," he said. She didn't glance up. Knife, maybe, or glass? Thorne studied the cut, jaw tightening. "You think he was chased off?" "I think someone meant for him to disappear." "Not dead," Thorne muttered. "Gone." Silence settled heavy, broken only by Brack's ragged breathing. Then Thorne turned and walked back into the dark. Arlen had come to Kindred Hollow 5 years earlier, thin as fence wire, skin burned raw by sun and road, bare feet, torn shawl, no past she cared to speak of. The war might have ended on paper, but not in her bones. Iron had once circled her wrists. Those shackles were likely melted down and poured into bullets. The smoke of it all still clung to her. Thorne never asked her name that first day, just pointed toward a weathered cabin behind the barn. "Roof's yours," he'd said, "if you work." She worked, never stopped. Folks in the nearest town spoke of Thorne Halvik in low tones, said he once rode with rangers, said he hunted men across the Badlands and threw down his badge after something went wrong, real wrong. Nobody ever pressed him for details. Nobody came knocking after dark. That night, Arlen lay awake in the loft above the barn. The sky outside was bruised purple, wind cutting thin and sharp through the boards. Below, Brack shifted in his stall. Something was coming. She didn't know how she knew, but she trusted that feeling, the same cold whisper that once told her to run when hounds were loosed behind her. She sat upright. Down in the house, Thorne hadn't lit a lamp. He sat beside the window, rifle resting across his lap, cane propped against the wall. His right knee throbbed, the kind of ache that remembered more than weather. It remembered gunfire. The dogs barked once, then stopped. A moment later, hoofbeats rolled across the canyon like distant thunder. Dust rose along the ridge. A torch flared in the dark, then another, then 3 more. Thorne didn't move. 6 riders came down hard, one with a long scar carved across his nose. Another wore a string of dried ears looped from his belt. Garin Pikefall. They smelled of liquor and old blood. The man in front wore a faded Confederate officer's coat, half-buttoned, silver tooth flashing when he smiled. Calder Virex. "Evening," he called. "Fine spread you got here. Peaceful, too. You the owner?" Thorne stepped off the porch. "I am." "You the one they call Thorne Halvik?" "Depends who's asking." Calder chuckled low. "Name's Calder Virex. I ride with the Rust Howlers. Thought you might have heard." Thorne's gaze didn't flicker. "You're the dogs who burned Cochise Crossing. Strung a preacher up on his own church doors." Calder's grin widened. "That's us." He looked past Thorne toward the barn. "We're just looking to rest a spell. Maybe relieve you of that fine black horse I saw limping in." "He's got grit." Thorne's voice went cold. "That horse ain't yours?" Calder lifted a hand. The others swung down from their saddles. One spat into the dirt. Another drew a knife and scraped it clean beneath his nails. Up in the loft, Arlen watched through a crack in the boards, breath shallow. Calder stepped closer. "Out here, we take what we want. Ain't no law but who's left standing. So I'll say it plain. Step aside, old man." Thorne didn't move. Didn't blink. "You're not taking the horse?" Calder gave a lazy nod. "All right, then." Garin Pikefall lunged. Thorne's cane snapped up fast as a striking snake, cracking across Garin's face. The outlaw dropped hard, blood pouring from his nose into the dirt. A shot split the night. Calder Virex fired into the sky, the crack rolling off the canyon walls like thunder. Smoke curled from his barrel as he lowered it slow. "That was your warning," he called out. He tipped the gun toward Thorne. "Next one goes through your belly." Arlen had already snatched the shotgun from the barn wall. Her hands trembled, but the barrel stayed steady. "Leave him alone." The Rust Howlers burst into laughter. "Well, I'll be," one of them jeered. "She's got a voice." Calder lifted a brow, silver tooth flashing. "Girl, I've got a mind to test that nerve. Might take more than just the horse tonight." Thorne glanced at her, just once, and gave the faintest shake of his head. Slowly, Arlen lowered the gun. But her stare never left Calder. They dragged Brack from the stall, tied him behind one of their mounts, and rode out hard. As they went, torches flew onto the barn roof. Dry timber caught quick, flames racing along the boards like hungry fingers. But they hadn't counted on the irrigation trench Arlen had dug that spring. She tore down a canvas tarp and smothered the fire while Thorne hauled bucket after bucket from the well. Smoke choked the yard. Sparks snapped in the dark. They saved the barn. They didn't save the quiet. Hours later, inside the house, Thorne dropped to one knee and pried up a loose floorboard. Dust billowed as he pulled free a long bundle wrapped tight in oilcloth. Arlen stood in the doorway, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He unrolled it. A polished Colt Navy revolver, a dulled but readable badge. U.S. Marshal. A black coat stiff with age. "I thought you were done fighting," she said softly. "I was," Thorne answered. He buckled the gun belt around his waist. "You're not riding alone," she said. He looked up at her. "This isn't your fight." "It is now. Brack once carried me clear of men who meant to break me." She met his eyes. "And so did you." They stood in the thin glow of candlelight, two shadows stretching toward dawn. Neither spoke again. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The Rust Howlers had taken something they didn't understand. Now, something was coming for them. Morning came hard and pale, wind carrying the bitter scent of charred wood and scorched iron. Thorne stood at the yard's edge, cinching a worn saddle onto a paint mare. His black coat hung over the horn. Arlen stepped out with a satchel of dried beans, jerky, and a box of cartridges. She strapped it onto the second saddle, the one pulled down from the rafters after years of dust. "You're staying?" Thorne asked, though he knew. "No. I've tracked men before, she said. These don't scare me. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. We ride light. Ride fast. Catch 'em before they hole up somewhere tight. They pushed into the canyon at first light, hooves throwing dust, long shadows stretching over broken ground. Arlen rode straight-backed, shotgun slung across her saddle, hat low over her eyes. Thorne spoke little. He didn't need to. He moved like a man who'd lived too many years in a saddle, every shift precise, every glance deliberate. He read sign in ways she was still learning. Scuffed earth, crushed sage, bent grass heads. By noon, they found proof. A broken horseshoe half buried in dirt, dark with dried blood. Thorne swung down and brushed it clean. Brack, he muttered. How can you tell? Arlen asked. He threw this shoe a month back. Had it set with square nails. See the pattern? She knelt beside him, tracing the marks. They match. We're closer, she said. Not yet, he replied. They're riding easy. Think nobody's following. They pressed on. By dusk, the trail wound into dry hills and spilled into a box canyon. An old windmill creaked above an abandoned homestead, blades turning slow and tired. Thorne eased his mare, eyes sweeping the ridgeline. They camped here. Arlen drew in a breath. Smell that? Burned grease, he said. And something under it, she added. Copper, blood. They found a fire pit gone cold and the stripped carcass of a mule. Flies swarmed thick around a wagon. A tarp hung loose. Arlen pulled it back. A body lay beneath. Face crushed beyond recognition, eyes glassy and wide. His shirt bore a sheriff's star stitched in thread. His badge had been nailed to the wagon wheel like a message. Tobin Cress. Arlen swallowed. They kill lawmen, she whispered. They kill whoever stands, Thorne said. Been that way a long time. He pried the badge free, wrapped it careful in cloth, and slipped it inside his coat. He's got kin somewhere, Thorne said quietly. He deserves to be taken home. They didn't sleep that night. They took turns dozing with rifles across their laps, listening to coyotes cry in the dark. Coyotes cried out in the dark, their voices drifting thin across the flats. But nothing crept near their fire. When dawn broke pale and cold, Thorne Halvik studied the ground, crouched low over the prints in the dirt. He gave a single nod. Still fresh, he said. We're gaining on 'em. They rode south. The land shifted as they pushed on, sage thinning out, giving way to dry creek beds and jagged stone shelves that cut the horizon like broken teeth. Arlen Wren spotted her first cougar that afternoon, stretched lazy along a rock ledge, tail flicking slow like a fuse, waiting for flame. It watched them pass and didn't move. Near sundown, they reached Oriel, a dying scrap of a town. One saloon leaning crooked, a blacksmith shed sagging at the corners, a church with a cracked bell that hadn't rung in years. Wind slid through the streets, rattling shutters like loose bones. Thorne rode straight for the forge. Silas Dorn stepped out, soot ground deep into the lines of his face, wiping his hands on a rag too dirty to help much. Don't see many strangers, Silas muttered. We're looking for 6 riders, Thorne said. One with a silver tooth. Silas's eyes tightened. They came through 2 nights back. Took supplies. Stole my daughter's mule. Elka Dorns? Arlen asked quietly. Silas nodded once. Didn't pay a dime. Which way? Thorne asked. Headed for Devil's Acre. Thorne glanced at Arlen, her jaw set hard. We'll pay for the mule, she said. Silas waved her off. Just kill the bastards. That'll square us. Back on the trail, Thorne spoke low. Devil's Acre used to be silver country. When the veins ran dry, the law left with them. And now? Arlen asked. Now it's a hole in the earth full of ghosts. Too many bodies buried under that dirt. Why go there? Hideout, he said. They've got friends. He paused. And worse. They pressed the horses harder. Sweat darkened the animals' hides, breath coming rougher with every mile. At dusk, they stopped beside a canyon spring. Arlen pulled off her boots and let the cold water numb her aching feet. Thorne sat a few paces away, methodically cleaning his revolver, steel catching the last light. "I didn't know you wore a badge," she said. "Long time ago," Thorne replied without looking up. "Before I knew better." "What happened?" He turned the cylinder once. Slow. "I brought in a man. Claimed he stole horses. That's what I was told." He swallowed once. Truth was, he'd taken his wife and children and tried to run north. Said he just wanted them free. He begged me not to turn him in. The spring gurgled between them. "I did it anyway," Thorne continued. "Later found out they hanged him. Burned his cabin with his family still inside." Arlen said nothing. The air tightened like a drawn wire. "I ain't asking forgiveness," Thorne added. "Just trying to mend a piece of what I broke." She nodded slowly. "My mother ran too," she said. "She didn't make it." A beat. "I did." They broke camp before the sun touched the ridgeline. 2 days out from Devil's Acre, smoke rose ahead through the scrub. A shack sat crooked off the trail. Thorne lifted a hand. "Something's wrong." They dismounted and moved in quiet, boots careful over loose rock. The shack door swung half open, creaking in the wind. Inside, blood streaked across the floorboards. Furniture lay shattered. Arlen touched a pot hanging over embers, still warm. "They just left," she whispered. Thorne scanned the tree line. "Stay here." Before she could answer, a shape burst from behind the shack. A man lunged at her, knife flashing. Arlen dropped low, ripping the shotgun free in one smooth motion. She fired from the hip. The blast kicked hard. The man spun and collapsed in the dust, blood blooming through his shirt. Thorne rushed forwards, but Arlen was already standing over him, breath coming sharp. The outlaw was young. His face carried crude ink, a snake curling along his cheekbone. "Rook Talver," she muttered. "He rides with the Rust Howlers?" Thorne knelt, gripping the man's collar. "Where's Calder Virex?" Rook coughed, blood staining his teeth. "Gone south. Left me. Said I was too slow." "Why Devil's Acre?" Thorne demanded. Rook gave a broken laugh. "You think they're hiding?" His grin spread red. "They're waiting. That horse was bait. Calder said you'd follow." Thorne's expression hardened. "Why?" Rook's eyes gleamed weakly. "Because you're the one who put a bullet through Malik Virex's spine." The words hung heavy. "He never forgot," Rook rasped. "Now he wants you watching her die." His body jerked once, then went still. Thorne rose slowly. Arlen wiped her hands against her coat, face pale but steady. "He knows who you are," she said quietly. "He does," Arlen said quietly, eyes fixed on Thorne Halvik. "He knows exactly who you are. That badge you kept. How many men died before you took it off for good?" Thorne didn't look away. "Too many." Wind swept across the scrub, kicking dust into the air. Rook Talver's knife rattled faintly against stone where it had fallen, the sound thin and hollow. Far south, a hawk wheeled high above the red cliffs of Devil's Acre. Arlen swung into the saddle. "Then we end this." Thorne studied her a moment. The girl who once showed up at his door with whip scars on her back and fire in her stare. Now she rode like judgment, hard-faced, unyielding as canyon rock. "We ride fast," he said. "And we don't stop," she answered. They turned south. The trail tightened as it wound between stone and scrub. Shadows stretched long across broken earth. The ground ahead felt heavy, thick with silence and old blood. They weren't tracking prey anymore. They were marching toward it. Devil's Acre lay under a veil of dust, crouched beneath red cliffs like something cursed. The old mining town sagged in on itself, buildings gray and rotted, stripped down to bone. Wind dragged splintered signs across warped porches. The main street ran crooked and straight all at once, ending at a collapsed assay office whose shattered windows stared out like blind eyes. Thorne Halvik and Arlen Wren stood on a bluff above it. Their horses blew hard behind them, flanks slick with sweat. Below, nothing. No firelight, no laughter, no clatter of glass. Just the uneasy stillness of a place waiting to see who would bleed first. "He's down there," Arlen murmured, eyes narrowed. "I can feel it." Thorne's fingers tapped the butt of his revolver, slow and steady. "They want us to walk in," he said. "Let's not disappoint him." They tied the horses behind a rock shelf and slipped down the ridge. Boots barely disturbed the gravel. Thorne moved through the back lanes, warped planks jutting like broken ribs. He marked 6 high points with a flick of his hand, old sharpshooter perches from when outlaws owned the streets. Arlen caught every signal. The ambush came fast. Gunfire exploded from above. Bullets cracked past them, tearing dirt inches from their boots. Thorne seized Arlen's arm and pulled her behind the old blacksmith shop. Wood splintered under impact. "They've got eyes on the church," he muttered. Bell towers manned. Lyle Merrick. Arlen steadied her breath. "I'll cut through the side alley. Get close. Shotgun's clean inside 10 yards. Thorne didn't like it, but he nodded once. "Don't miss." She slipped into shadow, vanishing between collapsed fences and sagging walls. Thorne circled right, ducking beneath a wagon axle and sprinting low toward the butcher's shed. He caught sight of the shooter. Wide-brimmed hat, scar slashed down his cheek like a dried riverbed, crouched in the tower, scanning. Then, a dull thud. Another. Silence. Thorne rose from cover. Lyle Merrick's body sagged halfway out the tower window, arms dangling lifeless. Arlen stepped from beside the jailhouse, face streaked with dust, shotgun loose in her hands. "One," she said. They moved together, sweeping each building methodically. The saloon stank of rot and sour whiskey. Upstairs, they found another man slumped in a chair, drunk beyond sense, rifle across his knees. Arlen stripped the weapon, dumped the shells onto the floor. "That's 2. "They're breaking," Thorne said. "Calder Virex will be in the mine." "Why there?" she asked, brow raised. "Because that's where I'd hole up." The mine entrance lay beyond town, hidden behind a leaning stable and piles of slag. One narrow path led in. No easy way out. The moment they stepped into its shadow, Thorne felt the trap closing. "We draw him out," he said. "Smoke him into daylight." "How?" He pulled a small flask from his coat. "Turpentine. They use this to treat the beams. Burns hot." He wrapped cloth around the mouth, struck a match, waited for flame to catch, then hurled it into a side shaft. Fire took fast. Dry timber roared, heat rolling through the tunnels. Smoke poured outward in thick waves. Screams echoed from inside, followed by frantic gunshots. 3 men burst from the main entrance, coughing, blinded. Thorne dropped the first with a clean shot to the chest. Arlen fired next, center mass. The second man folded hard into the dirt. The third outlaw spun and bolted, boots slipping in loose gravel. Thorne Halvik was quicker. 1 clean shot. The bullet caught him square in the spine, dropping him face first into the dust as black smoke rolled thick from the mine behind them. Then nothing. No more men rushed out, no more gunfire, just silence again. tight, brittle, waiting. "He's still in there," Thorne said. "He'll sit and wait," Arlen Wren answered, hesitation flickering across her face. "So do we go inside?" Thorne's voice turned flat. "No, that's what he wants. Darkness, tunnels, traps. Then we drag him into daylight." Thorne stooped, grabbed a rifle from one of the fallen Rust Howlers, and stepped toward the mouth of the mine. "Calder Virex," he shouted. "You owe me a reckoning. Come out and settle it." For a moment, only smoke answered. Then laughter rolled from the dark, harsh, familiar. "I've waited years for this, Thorne Halvik," Calder's voice echoed. "You finally crawl back to die with that guilt strapped to your spine. You took the girl. You threw down your badge. Spilled blood from Arkansas clear to Santa Fe. That guilt's yours," Thorne called back. A beat of silence. "She ain't the same girl you remember," Thorne went on. "She's iron and flame now. You built your own gallows." He worked the rifle's lever. "You coming out?" More laughter. "I already have." The voice came from behind them. Thorne spun. A tall figure rose from behind a heap of slag, broad shoulders framed in smoke. A kerchief masked his lower face. Silver flashed at his grin. "Calder Virex." Arlen moved first. Her pistol cleared leather. But Calder fired quicker. The shot grazed her shoulder, spinning her to the ground. Thorne roared and charged. Calder's second round struck Thorne in the thigh, but he didn't slow. He slammed into Calder, driving him hard into the dirt. They rolled, fists crashing into bone, breath tearing from lungs. Calder was bigger, Thorne was older. But Thorne carried years of buried fury. He smashed his forehead into Calder's brow, stunned him, ripped the revolver free from his grip. Blood streamed down Calder's face, and still he laughed. "Still slow, Marshal," he spat. "I ain't a marshal," Thorne growled. He drove his fist into Calder's throat, pinned him flat, and pressed the barrel to his chest. "But I remember justice." He pulled the trigger. The single shot cracked against the cliffs, final and hollow. Thorne staggered back, blood soaking through his pant leg. He sucked in air like a man surfacing from deep water. Arlen rose slowly, one hand clutched to her shoulder. Together, they looked down at Calder Virex's body. "He tried to bait you," she said. "I know." She met his gaze. "You baited him back." A faint, grim smile touched Thorne's mouth. "Wasn't hard." Arlen glanced around at Devil's Acre, smoke drifting from broken roofs. "It's over." Thorne lifted his eyes toward the darkening sky, where the first stars blinked to life. "No," he said quietly. "It's begun." Smoke twisted upward in thin strands. The setting sun smeared red and gold across the ridgeline like war paint. Thorne sat on a flat rock near town's edge, wrapping a torn strip of cloth tight around his wounded leg. The bullet had gone clean through, but the pain burned sharp, like memory. Arlen stood a few yards off, watching the trail that led back into open desert. Her arm was bandaged firm, her face unreadable. She hadn't said much since Calder fell. Neither had Thorne. They'd buried him behind the old stable. Shallow grave. No marker, just a stack of stones. He earned no name in the ground. "We could leave now," Arlen said at last. "No one would stop us." "No one even knows," she added. Thorne looked up. "Someone always asks. Deputy, Pinkerton, some friend of a friend." "You care what they say?" "I care what the story turns into." Arlen stepped closer. "Then tell it straight." Thorne nodded once. "He led the Rust Howlers, ruthless, took lives, stole from folks who had nothing, sold flesh when it suited him. He ran until the horizon caught him." "And the girl?" Arlen asked softly. "She followed him into the dark," Thorne said. But she didn't stay there. Arlen lowered her eyes to her hands. "When he took me," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I thought I'd die in that darkness. Thought the world was nothing but chains and silence." Thorne didn't interrupt. The wind filled the space between them. "But you taught me something," she continued. "Vengeance ain't the end. It's just the last door." She lifted her gaze. "After that, you've got to live." Thorne gave a slow nod. "Living's the hard part. That's where truth sits." Bootsteps crunched over dry earth. Both turned. A rider approached through the fading light, hat brim low, a badge catching the last glow of sunset on his chest. Judd Caro. The rider slowed his horse beside the sagging saloon and swung down with easy control. He was younger than Thorne Halvik, but not green. His eyes carried the look of a man who'd seen enough to expect the worst from people. He tipped his hat. "Judd Caro. I heard Devil's Acre lit up last night. Fire, gunshots. Found 3 bodies on the North Trail. Rust Howlers." Thorne said nothing. Judd's gaze sharpened. "You two part of that?" "We were," Thorne answered evenly. Judd Caro turned in a slow circle, studying the charred mine, the hollowed-out town that looked picked clean like a carcass. "You handle it by the book?" he asked. "There ain't a book for men like Calder Virex," Arlen Wren said. Judd glanced at her, interest flickering. "You the one folks say he took?" "I was," she replied. "I ain't that anymore." Judd held her gaze a moment longer, then looked back to Thorne. "Name used to carry weight," he said. "Thorne Halvik, U.S. Marshal." Recognition moved across his face. "Heard you disappeared after Fort Brazos. Folks said you turned ghost." "Didn't disappear," Thorne said. "Just stopped being worth the trouble of finding." Judd glanced toward the rough grave behind the stable, stones stacked plain. "Looks like you still know how to track down the worst of them." "I didn't come to be remembered," Thorne said quietly. "I came to make sure she wasn't forgotten." Silence settled between them, heavy with things too old to undo. Judd exhaled slowly. "If I write this official, it'll mean paperwork stacked to the ceiling." "You could say you found him dead," Arlen offered. "Mine fire." Greed caught up to him. Judd looked at her again. Longer this time. "That what you want?" She shook her head. "No. I want it known a man rode here for justice, not glory. And a girl nobody cared about stood her ground." Judd gave a slow nod. "Calder Virex had a bounty, big one, enough to buy a new start somewhere." "That's what the stories say," Thorne replied. "We didn't ride for money." "I know," Judd said quietly. "That's why you ought to take it." He turned, then paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "You heading somewhere?" "South," Thorne answered. "String of border towns, maybe the coast." "Good," Judd said, swinging into the saddle. "Some places still need stories like yours." He rode off into the falling dusk without looking back. Arlen watched him disappear down the trail. "Do we take the bounty?" she asked. "We earned it," Thorne said. He looked toward the horizon where the sun touched the canyon rim and set the sky ablaze one last time. "And after?" He studied the open land ahead. "We ride until the story gets too old to chase." A faint smile touched her lips. "I can ride that far." They packed in silence. Leather creaked as Thorne settled into the saddle, his wounded legs stiff but steady. Arlen mounted smooth, reins in one hand, shotgun resting across her back like a promise she meant to keep. They rode out of Devil's Acre as the town shrank behind them. Nothing but smoke and memory. Wind pressed cold against their backs. Ahead, the land opened wide and endless. 2 long shadows stretched across the dying light. One belonged to a girl who once wore chains, the other to a man who once wore a badge. Side by side, they rode forward, into open country and into legend. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.